Okay, so now we're going to talk about the what ifs, right? Because we've talked about how to set goals, we've talked about the perspective of planning. I want to talk about how human nature kicks in, right? Because inevitably, when we ask someone to grow as an individual, self-sabotage will kick in. And we need to talk about some of these principles so you've got them planted firmly in your mind. Now, these will apply not only to your business, it'll also apply to your family life and to yourself. It all starts with some of these simple rules. The very first rule is all about the two kinds of people that we meet on the planet, right? There's two kinds of people that we meet. One of them is going to be Mr. Excuseitis, and they usually start off with this one. They live in this state of denial. Now, the person who lives in a state of denial in business is obvious because they're usually the ones that tell you how busy they are, flat out. You know, and you ask them how's business, they go, oh, we're flat out. But then you ask the second question, are you making money? And they say, we don't know. That's up to the accountant. We just do everything we can. We're just busy all the time. Now, this state of denial is lying to the one person on the planet you should never lie to, which is yourself. Now, you think about what denial is. It's like having your head buried in a bucket of sand. The problem with having your head buried in a bucket of sand is which part of your anatomy is sticking up. It's the part that's going to get kicked. It's going to get kicked by the economy, by the competitors, and just by the marketplace. So we need to be wary of not living in this state of denial. Now, we can migrate from the state of denial, which is head in bucket of sand, to the next one, which is, I don't live in denial anymore. I just justify all the reasons that I'm not being successful. I'll justify the reasons I haven't achieved my goals. I'll justify the reasons that I can't find good people. I'll basically give you every excuse under the sun for why my business is not successful. Now, here's the good news about justification. You can always justify your way out of everything. But one thing it doesn't do, it does not allow you to fix the problem. All it does is allows you to come up with lots and lots of excuses. And sometimes people migrate from excuses, they upgrade to a thing called blame. Now, when we talk about blame, it's just an excuse, but you're pointing the finger at someone else. And one of the things we love about blame, excuse, and denial is that it's easy. Right? It's easy when it's not my fault. It's easy when I don't know about it. And it's easy when it's your fault because I can't do anything about it. But the truth of these three words here is they are the biggest waste of time and energy and effort on the planet. And as a business owner, unless you're aware that you're doing this, right, you're actually going to buy your own garbage. Right? We don't want you to be doing that. We want you to be being above the line and not below the line. Because down here, we create what's called a victim. And sometimes we love playing the victim because misery loves company. And so as a victim, we get a lot of sympathy and we get a lot of empathy and we get a lot of people who sort of feel for us. But it doesn't fix the problem. We need to move away from this sort of behaviour, especially in our business and in our planning, and we need to start stepping up to above the line here. So the first thing you need to realise is it's your business, you own it. You own your own ship, right? And as the owner of your own ship, you need to be not only accountable for the results that your business is producing, which is basically the profitability, you also need to be responsible for what's going on. Now let's talk about the distinction between these two words, accountable and responsible. The first thing you need to know is accountable has the word count in the middle of it because basically accountants count money for a living. Accountable in business means the numbers don't lie. So we live and die by the profitability of our business and we use it for what it is, the truth, right? And if we use it as the truth, then we can understand what we need to do to actually move forward and what we should stop doing. Responsible comes from two words, our ability to respond or how we act in accordance with what's going on within the business. And if we take these two on board and we start being accountable for our results and responsible for our actions, we're going to change our business dramatically over the next planning period. So we need to start thinking about results rather than just being a victim. So I just need you to be aware that this might not be you. This might be someone else within your organisation that's actually pulling you down. And you need to be very quick to respond to blame, excuse, denial and get it out of your vocabulary. Because while you're down here, the business is not going to move forward. As soon as you take this side of the equation and you start taking ownership, you're accountable for the results and you're responsible for the actions, Now we've got something to work with. So now I just want to go on to the next point, because now that we understand that we need to stay above the line in our business, we need to talk about one thing that most people are terrified of. Right? It's this one here. Even the word terrifies people, you know. Now, here's the question. Is failure good or bad? Because for most people, they go, oh no, failure is good as long as you learn from your mistakes. And this is so true. But then when we ask people who loves to fail, very few people love to fail. So they know failure is good, but they hate it. Why? Simple, right? Because when we were at school, we were taught that failure is bad, because if you failed at school, you got in trouble. If you failed at school, you got kept down, you got measured, you got judged. And so what we learned as a young kid in school was the opposite from what babies learn. Because you think about it, when a baby tries to walk, they climb up on the furniture and they take 3 steps and fall over, what do we say to that kid? We say, that was awesome, well done, right? The kid goes, well, what? I fell over. No, you tried, right? Now, kids at that age are very teachable and they're encouraged to learn new things. As soon as we go through school, we have 12 years of being judged, and all of a sudden failure is not that good anymore and we're fearful of it. So I want you to learn and understand that failure is important in business. Okay? Now this sounds weird. The more you fail in business, the more you succeed. The trick is to learn to fail faster and in smaller increments, right? Because big failures are hard to recover from. Small failures are easy to recover from. So we need to be embracing failure. We need to learn how to do things and learn from the corrections or the errors that occur along the way. Because it's not about the failure, it's about what you learn from the failure that makes you successful in business. So be prepared to fail. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is probably one of the most interesting things, and for those of you that had teenage kids, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. It's these 2 words. See, if I go to a teenage kid and I ask the question, have you cleaned your room? The usual answer is going to be no. And I say, look, you know what? You need to clean your room before you go, I know. Look, have you done your homework? Yeah, I've heard you before, yada, 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 I know. What is the kid telling me? The kid's telling me that he's not listening. Now, kids verbalise this by saying the words I know, adults don't. And often they go through a process and they look at something and they make a judgment call on it too early. And by making a judgment call on something, you actually lose the ability to learn. It's like the shutters are coming up. So as you go through this learning process, through this planning process and through the next quarter, I want you to think about how can you learn stuff in different levels, right? We need to take this out of our vocabulary and we need to start thinking in terms of not I know, I want you to become more of an observer than a judger when it comes to what goes on in your life. And then we can start opening the door to learning. The next thing that I really want to talk about is when we talk about goal setting, one of the resistances to goal setting, because we're going to talk about the things that will stop you from being successful in planning. And one of the biggest issues with goal setting is that people say, I'm not that materialistic. And I'll suggest that there's one thing that we all aspire to, and that's this one. It's quality of life. Now, here's the interesting thing about using the term quality of life. It does not mean money. Quality of life refers to lifestyle choices. Quality of life refers to happiness. Quality of life refers to health. It refers to all those things, and it's different for every single person. Now, if we think about where our quality of life comes from, if we think about what your quality of life is right now, it's probably pretty good. You know, we live in Australia. We're not a third world country. We've got lots going on here. Ironically, in Australia, if you're on the dole, you're still considered to be in the top 10% of income earners on the planet. So don't ever think that we've got it tough in this country, right? But the quality of life is going to come from a thing called the quality of our results. Now you may recall I spoke about results in terms of goal setting, right? And if we look at the quality of results that we get, it usually interprets in the quality of our life. But where do our results come from, right? Our results are going to come from the things that we actually do. So the quality of our actions will lead to the quality of our results, which will lead to the quality of our life. And we go, yeah, where are you going with this, David? Well, I want to talk about those actions that you take and where they come from. So when you decide to do something, how do you decide what you're going to do and what you're not going to do? Well, it's going to come down to this one. You've already heard me say it. It's the quality of your decisions that determine the quality of your actions, determine the quality of the results in your life. Now, where do our decisions come from? Good question. I knew you'd ask it. Right? Our decisions come from the quality of our questions. So it's the questions that you ask yourself. Because sometimes people ask very bad questions, and I'll give you an example. Why does this always happen to me? That's what's called an implied question, because the implication is that it always happens to you. You've got to ask better questions, because when we ask negative questions like that, we take ourselves below the line straight away. So we've got to think about the quality of our questions, which will determine the decisions, the actions, and the results we get in life. But where do our questions come from? See, ultimately, our questions come from our knowledge. And here's the thing that's sort of the funniest thing that I know, right? Because people often ask me about investing in the future and where they should invest their money, in shares or in property or in trust funds. And look, in the end, here's one thing I know. If you invest in your own knowledge, right, every cent you spend will stay with you for the rest of your life. And what I mean by that is you learn, you read books, you go to seminars, and you improve your knowledge. And if you improve your knowledge, you'll improve your questions. And if you follow this flow, you'll end up getting improved quality of life. So you need to sort of understand that knowledge is a key to you progressing forward, because you'll only grow to your level of incompetence, right? And you can improve your level of incompetence by learning to be more competent. And this is through your knowledge. One last thing I just want to touch on here. Because often the reason we plan in business is that we're looking for ways to actually take our end result, our goal, and turn it into bite-sized chunks. And then the thing that gets in the way is our own level of resistance. And I want to talk a bit about what's known as the formula for change. Now, if we think about how change occurs in our lifetimes, change occurs by us doing things differently. But one of the problems with change is no one likes it. Why don't they like it? Because it takes them out of their comfort zone. So if we think about how change occurs, we can actually start tackling this and breaking it down into some bite-sized chunks. Now, I'm going to teach a formula today, and it's actually been derived from a fellow by the name of Buckminster Fuller. Now, some of you might know who he is. Some of you will never know who he is. And some of you will look at this and go cross-eyed as I write it on the board, because it's very scientific. But once I explain what we're talking about here, you'll understand how this applies to you changing things in your own life. So in simple terms, if we start with the right-hand side here, this R over here stands for resistance. Now, resistance is our resistance to change. Now, if we look at this formula, it says D times V plus N has to be greater than our resistance to change. Well, what does that mean? What it means is simple. If I want things to change in my life, I need the things that are sort of asking me to change, the things that are begging me to change, to be greater than my resistance to that change. So what are those things? Well, the first one here is D. D stands for dissatisfaction. Dissatisfaction, in simple terms, is your unhappiness with the current situation. So if you're dissatisfied where you are in life right now, that could be a great motivator for you for change. And if that dissatisfaction is greater than your resistance, you're well on the way to changing things within your life. But it's not just about dissatisfaction. It's also about the vision, or where we want to go. What does the future look like for us? So dissatisfaction multiplied by vision. So this is the carrot, this is the stick. Right? These two things here have to be greater than our resistance for things to change. And the last part of this formula is a thing called N, or the next steps. Now, what do I mean by that? I'll give you a bit of an example. You know, we get to New Year's Eve and most people have New Year's resolutions, and their New Year's resolution is to join the gym or to lose some weight or to do something different. Now, joining the gym's not difficult, because that's just the next step. Making the decision to join the gym is not difficult, because that's just about dissatisfaction. It could be looking in the mirror. It could be someone you haven't seen for years going, geez, you've put on a few kilos, David. It could be vision. You could be looking at a magazine and seeing someone who's pretty buff. But the real issue is not joining the gym. The real issue is going every single week. So how do we make sure that we're motivated? Well, we need to make sure that this side of the formula, our dissatisfaction, unhappiness with our current situation, our vision, our desire in the future, and getting up in the morning are all greater than our resistance to change. So I want you to think in terms of anything that you're trying to change within your life and work out where you need to focus your energy. Because you'll notice one last thing here is that I multiplied dissatisfaction and vision, but I only added next steps. And if you're wondering why, it's sort of simple. If we look at all of these different symbols here, resistance, logical or emotional, it's an emotional thing, our resistance, right? Dissatisfaction is an emotional thing. Vision, logical or emotional, it's an emotional thing. The only logical thing here is the next step, which is knowing what to do next. So sometimes people put a plan together and it's just full of next steps, but there's no real emotion backing the plan. The problem with that is that's only added. So the level of impact a next step has is minimal. The level of impact on change is maximized when we work on the emotional side of things, right? So you really got to work out what's the dissatisfaction that's driving you, what's the vision, where do you want to go with your business, what's it going to look like when it's finished, and what's your resistance to change. So what's the obstacles that get in the way? If you can work on these things, we can overcome change and we can move forward in a hurry. One last thing. When we talk about resistance and we talk about how do I lower someone's resistance, well, it's quite an interesting question. Now, if any of you remember Mr. Squiggle, when you went to school, you're going to have to guess what this is. Not a potato in the ground. It's an iceberg. Now, we use an iceberg to symbolize how we see ourselves, because often when we think about an iceberg, we realize that 80% of the iceberg's beneath the surface and there's only 20 or 10% above the water. But when we look at the part that sank the Titanic, it wasn't the part above the water, it was the part beneath the surface. And the same with self-sabotage. So when we talk about growth of an individual and we start working with individuals and you say, well, why do I set goals and never achieve them? Well, you might be asking the wrong question, right? Because above the surface is what we see in terms of behaviour. Now, if we look at someone's behaviour, it shows up in two ways. It's either the actions they take or the decisions they make. Now, this stuff's all very apparent when you meet someone for the first time and you ask them a few questions or they start work with you for a couple of months, you'll start to see all the behaviour. But what you don't see is what's happening beneath the surface. So the first thing that we look for beneath the surface is people generally do what they're good at. So if you're good at cooking, chances are you're going to have dinner parties at home. If you're not good at cooking, chances are you're going to spend a lot of time at restaurants. So your behaviour is a reflection of your skills, but I can't see your skills until you do something. So we've got to look beneath the surface. Now, when it comes to change, and we're talking about changing how people move forward, the deeper into this iceberg we go, the more difficult it is to change things about people. So where do our skills come from? Our skills come from this thing, which is our beliefs. And when we talk about our beliefs, often people get a little bit confused about this one. Because beliefs, we're starting to get into that sort of soft side of, personal development. And we ask people, what are beliefs? And most people go, well, a belief is something you believe, which sort of doesn't answer the question. Because what a belief is it's an interpretation of something that you hold to be true. So I'll give you an example. If I have twins, right, and I tell one of those kids, you're gifted at maths because every time you come back from school, you're always getting high marks. That kid will start to listen to me. Now, here's the funny thing about beliefs, right? The average person has about 65,000 beliefs in their head at any point in time. 45,000 of those were actually decided upon before age 7. So the majority of the beliefs that you have in your head have been given to you before you turn 7 years old. What happens at 7? Well, I think at 7 years old, kids start to reason, which means that they don't accept everything to be true. So here's one of my kids, one of my twins, and I say, you know what, you're gifted at maths, you should keep going. And they've got all the confidence in the world, and they keep getting 9 out of 10 for their math test. Now, the twin brother is terrible at maths, and he just keeps getting bad marks. And so we look at him and go, look, you know what, you're probably more artistic than you are mathematical, so it's just that you're no good with maths. Now, here's the problem for the young child. They don't question these beliefs. They get inserted into their head, and they start to use them as determinations for what they're going to learn. So the kid who's been told he's no good at maths, you're better off doing arts, he'll probably go and do an arts course. The kid that was told he's gifted at maths, he'll probably do more mathematics. And so we've started to inject through beliefs what people will develop skills in. Now, the problem with these beliefs is that they do govern what we think we can and can't do. So we need to start questioning them, because it's not whether a belief is good or bad. The question is that belief serving you? Now, if you don't know what your beliefs are, all you need to do is ask some questions about yourself. Because I ask people often, what is your belief around money? Money is quite an emotional topic. So for most people, I don't say, tell me what you should believe. I say, tell me what you used to hear around the dinner table at home. And typical answers will be things like this: we didn't talk about money at the dinner table. Or some people would say, if you want to make money, you've got to work hard. Or some people would say, money is the root of all evil. Now, all of these are just beliefs. And they're not true or not true. They're just statements that you have used to actually determine how you act in life. But here's the question. It's not whether a belief's true or not. The question is it serving you? Because the truth of the matter is that statement, money is the root of all evil, is only part of what's in the Bible. It's the love of money that's the root of all evil, which is actually greed. But people will use those interpretations to substantiate who they are. So you'll notice that people who don't have a lot of money generally have a negative connection with money. And so they can never be seen to have any because their beliefs don't support it. Now, here's the funny thing about beliefs is whatever happens in your life, you will interpret the evidence to support your belief. So what I mean by this is if you sort of believe that you have to work hard to make money, and you meet someone that's made a lot of money and didn't have to work for it, oh, he's ripping people off, right? He must be a scam artist because he must have inherited the money. Because in your mind, he couldn't have possibly got it because your belief is that you had to work hard to make the money. Now remember, I'm not suggesting beliefs are right or wrong. I'm just suggesting they either serve you or they don't serve you. And most of them you would have got before age 7. So start questioning what you believe to be true, and you can start changing your skills and your behaviour. Tell you another belief most people have is that they're terrible with names. Now, if I come up to you and say, I'm terrible with names, what am I already telling you? I'm telling you that I'm not interested in remembering your name, or I'm hopeless at it. The truth of the matter is if I said, I'll give you $1,000 for every name you remember, all of a sudden you're not going to be so terrible with names, you're going to make the effort. So be wary when the beliefs are dictating the skills. Let's quickly move down from beliefs. The next thing we want to look at is values. Now, subtle difference. A belief is something that you use as evidence to create a shortcut in your brain. A value is more generic. And the way that we answer the values question is when we ask people what's most important to them. What's most important to you about life? What's most important to you about the people around you? What's most important about the business that you own? Now, where does this come into the equation of goal setting? Well, more importantly, where does this come into the equation of how you build your business, right? One thing we haven't talked about is when we create vision, mission, and culture for a business, we also need to decide what kind of people we want to work with. And that's where the values kick in. So a business that's looking to attract high caliber employees will have a clear set of values attached to their vision and mission so that they can attract people who've got a similar set of values to themselves. Now, the last part of this iceberg is your identity. The two most powerful words in the English language are the words, I am. So whatever you say after those two words is true for you, and that's your identity and how you see yourself. Now, here's one of my issues with identity. Most people, well, everyone has an identity. This is our ego, and this is how we see ourselves. Right? And as we try to grow our business or try to change our behavior in life, our identity is going to fight back. And so our identity will hold us where we are. And the only way that we can shift forward, change our behavior on a permanent basis, is to be drilling down into this iceberg, and the deeper we go, the harder it is to change. And our identity has to be changed to the future self. So part of what we teach people in coaching is when you picture your future business being super successful, I want you to imagine what it would be like to be that business owner. Because if we can shift this identity forward, the business will follow. One last thing you need to know about this iceberg. It actually lives in an ocean. That ocean is also known as your environment. And your environment is so important. I mean, when my kids were growing up, I didn't really care what profession they chose. What I cared most about is who they hung around with. because the people you hang around with in your environment will dictate more about who you are and what your identity is than anything else. So when we talk about change and we talk about people's resistance to change and your resistance to change, we need to start getting beneath the surface and understanding what's actually holding you back. What are the anchors in your life? Is it your identity? Is it your beliefs? Is it your skills? Is it your values? Or is it your environment? Because if we don't address these issues, self-sabotage is almost guaranteed.